Holy cow, it is really early.
I can't believe you guys made it.
You all must be super excited to find out about how to make your app more successful with Firebase.
I'm excited.
Yeah, or you're from Europe and are jet-lagged and have been up for hours anyway, or East Coast. Show of hands, like jet-lagged people, Europeans, East Coasters. All right, yeah.
Yay!
About half the audience.
Hopefully we'll wake you up.
Yes.
And live stream. Hello, Internet.
Hi, Internet.
Thank you for joining us. Hi, Mom. All right.
So this here's Jumana.
And this is Todd.
And we're going to talk about how to make your app more successful with Firebase.
All right. How about you get started with
I'll
that?
get started. You take a rest. We actually both kind of had to run here because we had to kind of get through the security line and get here in time. So you're going to relax and drink some water while I do the talking first. So as we all know, building a great app is nice, but it is only half the battle. So yes, we all love getting like nice review scores and thumbs up and nice comments from the people that use our apps. But it turns out our landlord usually does not accept those as payment, even in San Francisco. You still often need to make money. And so if you're like a lot of developers, maybe like a typical game developer, you've got a business model that consists of like selling some in-app purchases and then maybe kind of crossing your fingers, hoping for the best, and maybe that's it. If you're feeling ambitious, you might be doing a couple of tests to help improve this. But this sometimes involves a fair amount of like one-off engineering work. This ends up being kind of hard to scale. Well, lucky for you and for this talk, this is one area where Firebase can help. So Firebase does help you reduce the time it takes to build your app in the first place with lots of great products like Cloud Functions and Cloud Firestore and Cloud Storage and other stuff that probably begins with cloud, because we like that. But we also provide you with a bunch of out-of-the-box solutions that can help you grow your user base, retain it, and monetize it. So let's talk about how we can move our monetization model from like, let's just try some stuff and hope something works, to something more sophisticated and data-driven. So Jumana, why don't you take it from here?
I will.
All right.
Thank you. So there's nothing quite wrong with hope. But as my fellow product manager over here, Jane, would tell you, hope but verify. So she walks in one day, and she wants to change the layout of the store. She thinks that if we change the layout of the store, we could make more money, say, in our game. Which brings out a lot of questions, like, how are we really going to do this? What if we decide that was a bad idea? Do we have to relaunch the app if this was a bad idea? How do we measure success? And just tactically, how is all of this going to work? And so we're going to walk throughout this talk with how Firebase really can help Jane and her team achieve this and other ideas they may have. So first off, let's go to hope but verify. So for hope but verify, the first thing you need to do is actually start looking at the data and looking at what's exactly happening inside your app. So that's where the Google Analytics for Firebase SDK can come in to help. Even if you feel totally jet-lagged and unmotivated, adding the SDK without anything else, no customization, just single line of code, integrate the SDK, gives you a ton of value and a lot of insights about what's going on inside your app. For example, we capture automatically all in-app purchases that happen inside the app. There's also a lot of information about user engagement, session time, and so on. Retention cohorts, and how long you're retaining users you're acquiring on certain weeks. Daily active users, and other demographic information. Here is such report. For example, in this report, you can see which of your in-app purchases are selling the best, and how much you're making off of them, and who is really buying them. And all of this, really, the SDK is free, and the reporting is free on it. And there's unlimited events, 500 events.
500 events.
And unlimited volume on these events. So you can take advantage of this right away. And if you're feeling a little bit more motivated, which you should, one line of code gets you a lot more of what's really happening inside of your app. So you can say, if you have a game, put when the round is over, or when the tutorial started, when the tutorial ended, when somebody joined the league, when somebody shared the app or the game with their friends, or really any such important event inside your app that gives you a sense that the user is making it through the user journey you're intending for them inside your app. And adding these events, like I said, is generally one line of code. And once you have that in, you can start asking a lot of more complicated questions, especially if you combine that with BigQuery, which Firebase gives you access to as well. So you can ask questions like, how easy is level 5, or how hard is level 5, and how many people are making it through the tutorial, and so on. Once you have those events in, you can actually go ahead and from the Firebase console label a few of them as conversion events. So when you label something as a conversion event, that just means this event is like super important. It's a huge milestone in the user journey with your app. So conversion events come into play throughout the Firebase platform, and we will see how later on. But they're important. They help you refine a whole bunch of targeting. For example, you can refine your ad campaigns so that whatever ad platform you're using, you're saying, get me more users who are more like this, or who are likely to complete one of these conversion events. So we'll talk about this a little bit more later, and stay tuned. Now to the second stage of getting Jane what she wants, which is actually making the change.
Yes, actually making some changes. So now that we can see what's happening in our app, well, OK, now we can start changing some things, see if they're having any kind of effect. And we're going to be using Firebase Remote Config as the primary driver of these changes. Now, if you haven't used Remote Config before, actually, show of hands, who has used Remote Config? OK. All right, a few, mostly clustered in this area. So I'm going to talk to this part of the room, because you all know what's going on. If you've never used Remote Config before, you can kind of think of it like a key value store that lives in the cloud that your app can use to change like the look and feel and behavior of how it works without your needing to publish a new version of your app to the app or the Play Store. So the way it generally works is you're going to set up a bunch of values locally on your device. And then as time goes on, when you want to change one of these values, you can use that using Remote Config, which you will do in the cloud, either using the Firebase console or using the REST API that we just announced like a month or two ago. If you haven't tried the REST API, a lot of people are asking for it. It's now available, so you can make changes there. We got one fist pump. Thank you. Excited fist pumper. So basically, then when your user starts up their app the next time, Remote Config is going to download these values from the cloud and apply them on top of your default values. And so then when you ask Remote Config for the value associated with a certain key, you will either get the default value that you supplied originally or the new value that you supplied from the cloud.
Wait. I see the thought bubble over the audience that says, what about my user data?
Your user's data plan?
Yes.
Thank you for asking that completely spontaneous question. So what's nice about this setup is that you're only downloading the deltas, right? The values that have changed since the defaults that you supply are, originally locally within your app. And that means you can basically keep as many values as you want in Remote Config, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of values. And because you're only downloading the values that you want to change from the cloud, the actual amount of data that your user is downloading is still nice and small, and it doesn't end up being a big hit on their data plan or battery, which is nice. And so our recommendation is kind of look at any value you might want to change within your app, whether that's like the look and feel of your buttons, or the difficulty level of your game, or how or if you're displaying ads, or the way items are organized in your store. Right? Everything that you've got in like one of these constant files somewhere, we all have one of these somewhere in our app, take a few hours to refactor this and get it to go through Remote Config. Once you've done that, you basically have the power to change anything in your app directly from the Firebase console, again, without your needing to publish a new version of your app to any of the various stores. So for instance, if we've gone ahead and parameterized our store layout as a variable that we are running through Remote Config, this is then something we can easily update through the Firebase console. Right? We add this parameter, publish it out to the world, and that lets us easily implement Jane's idea. And we're done. That was easy. Boy, we're done a lot sooner than I expected.
Yeah, I know.
That was great.
That was very cool.
Yeah, you want to get some coffee? I could totally go for some coffee right now.
Some coffee.
Oh, wait a minute. All right, Jane's got more ideas.
I'm going to let him handle Jane this time.
I thought we could get out of here early. All right. This is what happens. You give a product manager a cookie, and they want a glass of wine to go with it. And also more.
An Excel sheet.
Yes, and also more ways to monetize. So it turns out now that we've added the ability to change our store layout, that has given Jane a bunch of other ideas that she wants to try. Well, now she's thinking, OK, it's great that we're changing our store layout to show the most expensive items first, But will that scare off like our new players, or players that haven't made a purchase? What if we only change our store layout for players who have purchased stuff in the past? So maybe we can kind of maximize our average purchase per user while also encouraging our new users to go in and try out something by just buying a little thing. So this is something we can actually do pretty easily with the systems we already have in place. We don't really need to do anything new here. Because, see, when you implement analytics, you have the ability to create audiences. And these are users who meet certain kind of arbitrary criteria within your app, like some combination of hitting certain events a number of times and being assigned a certain user property. And one audience that analytics will create automatically for you when you start it up is this purchaser's audience, which is basically anybody who has ever spent any money in your app. And one nice thing about remote config that I didn't tell you about earlier is that it contains a bunch of logic on the back end that lets you send different values to different users depending on their situation. So, for instance, you can send different values to your Canadian users if you want to provide like a nice localized experience for them, or you want to test some version of your app in Canada before rolling it out to the rest of the world. And another thing you can do with remote config is send different values to different users depending on if they're in different analytics audiences, like this purchaser's audience we just talked about a slide ago. And so we can tell remote config, hey, you know what? Let's create a special condition for people based on whether or not they are in this purchaser's audience. And then we can change our store layout only for people that are within this group. And so we get to implement Jane's new monetization strategy.
She looks really happy about that.
She does look happy. Look at that smile.
Ecstatic.
She is ecstatic right now. That's
that launched 1,000 apps.
Yeah, warms my heart. So while this makes her happy, it also kind of gets her thinking, well, it's great we're able to change our behavior for users who have purchased stuff in the past, but wouldn't it be nice if we could also change our store layout for maybe people who we think are about to spend money sometime in the near future? Well, gosh, that sounds great, but nobody can predict the future, can they, Jumana?
Well.
Product manager of Firebase Predictions.
I'll steal my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
The answer is an emphatic maybe, depending on how many users you have and how many events you're logging inside.
Maybe. That is exciting.
But it is a maybe if we can get some help from our robot friends. So predicting the future, as you may have guessed, machine learning is a big theme at I/O this year, and so is mindfulness. And here's a product that tries to combine both. So Firebase Predictions is a product that we launched in beta last October. And it's if you will, a batteries included predictive service. That means you don't really have to do anything in order to take advantage of it. You just have to be using the Firebase platform and logging your event. And we will do the machine learning on your behalf. So basically what we're trying to do here is use the app telemetry in order to discover user behavior. So for example, if you're sending us all of your Google Analytics through the Firebase SDK, we can start looking at some of the behavioral data of the users. So say, for example, your past spenders. So we'll take the past spenders, and we'll build the TensorFlow model. If you don't know, TensorFlow is Google's library for building and maintaining machine learning models. So again, you don't have to know anything about that. We'll build it for you. We'll choose the parameters. We'll hyper-tune it on your behalf. And then we'll start learning about the patterns of behavior that exist in your app. The first two behaviors we learn are about who's going to pay and who's going to stay, so spenders and churners. So these are your past spenders. We look at their past behavior, and then we can look at your user group and then help you identify the group of users who is likely to spend in the future. So if you're going to spend time trying to monetize more of your app, this is the correct group of user to kind of like address potentially with more promotions or something like that, to incentivize them to do a little bit more spend. So you may be asking yourself,
what can I do with these groups once we create them?
There you go.
Yeah.
Even without his first cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Right on the money. So yes, you can use it anywhere that Todd already showed us how to use it in remote configuration. So you can use it in remote configuration for targeting. You can use it in notifications, or you can use it in A/B experimentations. So basically, the idea here is to find the right groups of users so that we're not bombarding everyone with everything all the time. So just you're taking more targeted actions, and you're getting a lot more conversions in your app without kind of bombarding all your users with everything that's happening all the time. So how do you take advantage of this? You
Do you need several years of graduate study in machine learning?
That would be actually pretty fun, and it is a lot of fun.
Yeah?
But no, you can do it without that. But I encourage you to do, because it's a really worthy topic of study. But you actually just have to click a single button, turn predictions on, and voila. By voila, I mean it takes about 2 weeks to create the first predictions, but after that, it updates every day, depending on your volume of users and data and how much you've instrumented. But voila, nonetheless, voila stands.
It's a long, drawn-out voila, but it's
French word, voila.
Oh.
It's very poetic. Anyhow, so once we start analyzing the behavior of your users, it's then updated every day. So these predictions are updated based on actual user behavior. On a daily basis, your users may go from being predicted to spend to predicted to not spend, from being predicted to churn to being predicted to not churn. And you can start asking all these questions about groups of users in your app. If you went ahead and did instrument your app, and added conversion events, now you can start asking these questions about your conversion events and using the predictions to help your users go along the journey that you want them to have inside your app. So you can start asking who will share my app, or who will join a league, or who will reach level 5. Whatever event you logged as a conversion event, now you can start asking a prediction about it, like who is likely within the next week, say, to actually participate in this action, and only sort of like share this with your friends to people who are likely to engage in this. Like push people who are already behaviorally ready to take a certain event inside your app. And so Todd already defined the remote configuration for us. So to help Jane along, we're taking that store layout, we'll edit it, and now instead of having it show up only for the audience spenders or purchasers, previous purchasers, now we're going to give it to people who are predicted to spend, and then we publish that condition, and we are good to go. And that makes Jane super happy. Look at that ecstatic face. Ooh. So, but now she wants to try a lot more stuff, and she's worried it's going to break this initial success, so maybe we can help out a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think the trick is she needs to convince members of the team that her plan actually was a good idea. Like, the trick is, how do we know that all these changes we've made have actually worked? Like, even if we saw an uptick in spending while we were changing the store layout, how do we know that wasn't due to like random chance, or another promotion that we happened to be running at the time, or some other change that we made elsewhere within our app? I mean, how do we know if we hadn't made this change, we would have gotten even more revenue, right? It's something that we don't really know. And so instead of relying on like hunches or confirmation bias, we can prove it with data. And that's what Firebase Av Testing is for. So this is our tool to help you make sure that all the decisions you make in your product are backed up by actual data and not just kind of lucky guesses or things that you want to be true. So the process of creating an A/B test is you're basically going to define an experiment. And there are 3 steps involved whenever you want to create an experiment. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to define the group of users who you want to place into this experiment. Right? Maybe it's like 5% of your population, or maybe it's your users who speak Korean, or maybe it's your users who you've marked as like super competitive players in analytics, and you want to try some new multiplayer feature on them. The second step in creating your A/B test is telling A/B testing how you're going to create different experiences for each variant that you've put into this experiment. And generally speaking, you're going to do this by delivering different remote config values to each of these different variants. And I think that's important to note because, as we mentioned several slides earlier, you can basically take any constant in your app and wire it up to go through remote config, which basically means if you can define it in a variable, you can probably A/B test it. And so you get a fair amount of flexibility with what you can do with your A/B tests if you wire up your app to go through remote config for all of its constants that you're setting. So there's a lot of flexibility here. The final step is telling A/B testing what your primary goal here is of your experiment, right? Is it to improve retention? Is it to increase your in-app purchase revenue? Is it to increase the number of people who have made it through your onboarding flow? Essentially, if you can measure it in analytics, you can define it as a goal in your A/B test. And this is useful not just for helping to create your conclusions, but A/B testing will also use this to refine your experiment along the way to make sure that it's finding you exactly the variant that gets the exact maximum value in the thing you're interested in as your main goal of your experiment, using some fancy Bayesian statistics that I don't really understand. And then basically, you're going to kind of relax, right? Hang out with your friends in a hammock inside a giant glass dome, apparently. They're going to run out of oxygen.
Not as fast as if they were not using Firebase. They'd be panicking.
I guess
At least now they're relaxed.
Yeah, they're relaxed, so they'll run out of oxygen slower. And let Firebase do the rest of the work for you. So let's try and prove Jane's original hypothesis with data using an A/B test. And this is what it would look like going through the Firebase console. So the first step, we're defining who we're going to put into our experiment. So we're going to say, all right, our target audience is going to be users who are predicted to spend money within our app. And maybe we'll run our experiment on like 30% of those users. Then we're going to define a whole bunch of different store layouts here by providing different values to the store layout key that we're running through remote config. So here we have 3 variants in addition to our control. I think we allow you up to 7 variants plus a control group. So it's not just A/B tests, it's A, B, C, D, E, F tests. And then we're telling Firebase that we want our goal here to be maximizing our in-app purchase revenue. Note that in addition to our primary goal, you can define a number of secondary goals in all of your experiments. And this is useful just for kind of keeping track of the overall health of your app as you're running one of these A/B tests. Like if we make a change that really boosts our revenue, but it turns out we're so aggressive in pushing these, pushing the store that a lot of our users kind of get frustrated and leave and stop using our app, we would want to know that. And so that's sort of the point of having these secondary goals in all your A/B tests, is it gives you a way of kind of sanity checking your experiment and making sure your app is still overall healthy while you're in pursuit of whatever your primary goal is. And then basically check back in a couple weeks and see what happens. So this is sort of what a sample report might look like. We probably don't have time to go into full detail on all the charts and graphs that you get. But I think the big important takeaway is this sort of giant line of text up here in plain English that tells us basically out of all the options that we tried, showing the most expensive items first was, in fact, the proper way to maximize our in-app purchase revenue, at least among our users who were predicted to spend money. And by the way, this is not a completely hypothetical example, is it, Jumana?
No, it's not.
Oh.
You guessed right.
What a twist.
You were playing along. So we had our friends at Rockbite Games actually do that same thing. If you see them walking around, they're really awesome. Say hello and give them high fives. They're a small indie game shop in Armenia, actually. And they've tried actually changing their store in A/B testing multiple times. And a lot of these experiments end up being actually inconclusive. They couldn't find out a good layout for the store that maximizes revenue. But then they tried to change the layout of the store based on the predictions. I was skeptical, but it totally worked. So for users who were predicted to spend, they will put rare chests and items in the game that are important on top. And for users who are predicted to not spend, as you can see in the second one, they will put these crystal packages and a special one that's a high-value one for those who are predicted to not spend, to encourage them to stay more in the game. So the crystals are some sort of an in-game virtual currency. And in both situations, they increased their revenue by about 25% for the predicted segment, which is pretty good ROI for the investment we're talking about here.
I'd like a 25% increase in my revenue.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
So that worked out actually really, really great for them. So all these items are available for everyone. It's just the layout of the store was done differently. So it was a worthwhile experiment for them. And Jane feels totally vindicated. And now that encourages a whole bunch of people in the team to come up with new ideas. So this is Jared. Jared was just promoted to CEO. He's very eager, as you can tell. He's trying to prove himself. That's OK. He's very sincere. And he's like, OK, we want to experiment with whole new ways to extend our runway, make a little more money in the app. And we want to be open to new experiences. And with A/B testing and the Firebase platform, I think we can help that team along with some of more experimentation. So Jared now wants to start showing ads. Now, this can be a scary step for a lot of apps because you don't want to compromise sometimes the user experience with ads that could be intrusive or at the wrong time or any of that. So that's why A/B testing here can really help us, and then predictions can also help us. So if you have not used Admob before, you can go ahead and install the SDK from the Firebase console. And linking the SDK has a lot of advantages. One is that in the Firebase console, you can get all sorts of, and in the Admob console, I guess, all sorts of cool reports about which placements of your ads is getting what kind of exposure, what kind of clicks, and which ones are generating money and not generating money. But most importantly, as we're talking about experimentation, A/B testing, and that stuff, is that we actually predefined goals for estimated Admob revenue and total revenue. So that means when you're running an A/B test that involves ads, you can make sure as part of your goal that not only you're getting Admob revenue maximized, but you're also your total revenue maximized, which means you're not cannibalizing your in-app purchases. You can even set all three of them as goals. So you can keep a closer eye on what's happening throughout your app and all your monetization streams. So let's take that short rewarded ads. So for example, again, back to our game example, at the end of a level, if a user, for example, is predicted to not spend, you will show a rewarded video or something like this. So we'll go ahead and set the experiment for users predicted not to spend. We're going to try showing rewarded ads. And the goal here is to maximize our total revenue. Again, we don't want to maximize just the ads revenue because we want to make sure that in-app purchases are not hurt. So that sounds great. Jared is a lot more optimistic now, and he wants to try perhaps showing interstitials at some other point in the game. All right, well, showing interstitials sounds a little more scary, but we can do it with an A/B test and see how it does. So for users predicted not to spend, let's say we've already defined a remote configuration that controls how often these are being shown. We can not show them at all, show them more often or less often. User predicted not to spend. But in our goal this time, in addition to keeping an eye on the money, we keep our eye on retention. So we add goals for daily user engagement, for retention, to make sure that we're not compromising the overall user experience, which is something you really can even focus on with Firebase.
Absolutely,
right?
yes. Yes, these things here. And by the way, A/B testing isn't just about making money. I know that's kind of the whole theme of the presentation, but like, your game design team, for instance, could use A/B testing to make sure your game is, like fun. Which turns out fun games usually make more money too. That's sometimes helpful. So, we can try like tweaking the difficulty of a game to see what our users actually like playing more. So we can say, hey, you know what? Let's take 10% of our global audience and try, tweaking the difficulty levels. Try changing a few of the variables in sort of our base game setup that makes it either harder or easier for some of our players. And then see which one kind of increases our goal of daily user engagement, right? Do our players appreciate the challenge of a more complicated game? Does that sort of make them feel challenged? Do they get more involved? Or does increasing the difficulty level drive them away? They get frustrated, they give up. And actually, they wanted an easier game where they win more often because that makes them feel better, right? As someone who is a former game designer, I would have loved to have been able to run these tests. I often just kind of in the past had to guess and hope I got it right. And spoiler alert, very often I did not. So being able to run stuff like this directly from the Firebase console would have been fantastic. So while all of this is nice and helpful, we don't just want to kind of sit back and hope that our users spend money. Part of having an ongoing successful business is staying in communication with all of your customers or your users. It's a dialogue, not just a monologue. Sometimes that can sort of be for just a nice feel-good moment, make sure your users know that you care about them. And sometimes it's about driving players to perform a certain desired action, right? Maybe it's getting them back into your app if they haven't tried it in a while. Or, like trying out a new feature that you launched that you think they're going to be excited about. Or, maybe making an in-app purchase. And now one way we can do this is through notifications, which have very high visibility, as we all know. But they also do run the risk of annoying your user if you send them too frequently or too indiscriminately. And then they go and turn notifications off, which would be sad. So you kind of have to make sure that you are sending the right message to the right people. So when Sarah from Promotions comes by and tells us, hey, we're having a big I/O sale this week, we should tell everybody all about it, that sounds nice, but maybe instead of telling everybody, we should make sure we're targeting the right people, and we should probably make sure that we're delivering the right message. So we've had Firebase Cloud Messaging available for a while to help with this. And for a while, I think we've been saying, hey, one of the great things about cloud messaging is you can send the same message to all of your users on Android or iOS devices, with one call to the same service, which is true, and it's still nice, and it's helpful. But I think what often gets overlooked is cloud messaging also lets you take advantage of all of the targeting and experimentation features that we've been talking about today. So for example, if you want to announce a new sale to your players, you could send it to all of them, or you could send a notification only to those players who Firebase Predictions thinks are about to spend money or are likely to spend money in your app. And if you're not sure which version of your message is going to be most effective, well, guess what? You can A/B test it. Right? With Firebase A/B testing, you can try a message on a small segment of your population, say like 5% of your English-speaking users, because our notification is in English. And we'll try 2 different versions of our message, see which one is most effective, and tell A/B testing, hey, our primary goal here is to get them into our in-app store to at least start thinking about making a purchase, maybe something like that. And then we can see which version of our message was most effective in driving players towards that goal. Then once we've determined a winner, we can then go and roll it out to the rest of our users who weren't included in the original experiment. So you can kind of make sure that your marketing campaigns actually move the needle on the metrics that you care about before you roll them out widely to everyone, which is nice.
Yeah, it is super nice. So whether it's worth pointing out here that everything we've talked about here today, whether it's remote configuration, so you can give your Canadian users a little extra love.
Yes, or running an A/B test to improve your in-app purchase revenue.
Or starting to generate predictions to figure out who's going to hit a certain conversion event that you care about.
Yes, or running a cloud messaging campaign to deliver just the right message to just the right users and tell them about your big sale.
Any and all of this really can be run by anybody in your team, your game designers, your product managers, your growth engineers, from the Firebase console. So your engineering team has to only...
Go ahead. You take the control.
There you go. I'll take
no, you can have it.
Your engineering team has only a one-time setup hit to set up, for example, the Google Analytics, the remote configurations, the notifications, SDKs. But then your growth team can be running experiments for a couple of months and staying productive and trying to maximize your revenue and your retention inside your app, while the rest of the engineering team is working on other things. So you can have everybody on your team being super productive. And your monetization strategy can go from just hope to really nuanced hope and a lot of verification and iteration and a lot of A/B testing that leads you to the best outcome. Not everything's going to work out. Not every experiment is going to be the best thing you've done for your app. But without trying things out, you're not going to get to the best version of your app.
That's right. And you get to go from this to this, paying your landlord with actual money. And are those coins? Maybe it's Bitcoin. It's the Bay Area. You can pay your landlord in Bitcoin now. It's a thing we do.
Can.
I'm sure somewhere in San Francisco there's a landlord that is accepting Bitcoin. Guarantee. So if you want to find out more about some of the stuff we talked about today, there's a much more detailed and technical talk on cloud messaging, which is happening later on today at 4:30. And if you want to find out more about analytics and some of the new things that are happening this year with analytics, I think it's happening right after the cloud messaging talk, so you get an afternoon full of Firebase-y things. And if you have questions and want to talk to us, you can meet us in the sandbox. That's the big dome thing that is not box-shaped and doesn't have any sand in it, but we're calling them a sandbox. But it's the dome. It's the Flutter Firebase dome.
Yes.
And hey, if you like this presentation, be sure to let the I/O team know by providing feedback on the website here. And if you didn't like this presentation, my name was Colt McCandless, and I was from the Chromecast team.
And I wasn't here.
Right, she wasn't even here.
Don't even rate.
So with that, thank you very much for showing up. I think we finally get that coffee.
We do get that coffee.
We totally do. So we're going to head off here. And my clicker stopped working. We had a little thing where Jane popped up at the end, and we told her, meet us. Oh, there she is.
The sandbox,
there she is. No, you're going to meet us at the sandbox. That's right. Go away.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much.